San Agustin, which is his ship, we don't know why, but it runs aground in Drakes Bay. 1595, it's California's first shipwreck. We know it's still there, and there are artifacts of the ship that have at times been collected by Park Service there off of Point Reyes. So they end up constructing a boat. They actually have a launch, I think, and I think that they kind of add to it. I think it's 70 guys and their dogs. And it's an open top boat, and they take that thing out of Drakes Bay and they go all the way down the coast of California.
Welcome to California Frontier, the show about the often overlooked and unexpected early history of the place we call California. I'm your host, Damian Basic.
So it's an amazing story. So you have, and then Drake's here, English. Now you get into the 1580s, and now you start to have kind of Spain starts to go, okay, we got to make sure that these Manila galleons are safe, right, on their way back. They lost to San Juanillo in 1578. There's a lot of money. There are a lot of investors in this whole thing. And so it gets the viceroy's attention, and he, organizes in 1583, 1584, 1585, these kinds of, hey, Manila galleons, when you're on your way back, can you do a little exploration of California and see if there's any place where you could, maybe go there? We think in about 1583, Cape Mendocino may get named. And then in 1584, Gali, it comes, he is his ship passes down the coast of California, and he's kind of writing about it. Finally, a major expedition is kind of not major, but officially sanctioned expedition. The viceroy tells Gali, you're going to stop in California, preferably if you can get north of Cape Mendocino and explore it. But you're going to explore California looking for a place where these galleons can stop. And so in 1587, when Gali is supposed to go, he dies in the Philippines, actually the year before, I think. And in his place goes a man named Pedro Unamuno. So in 1587, Pedro Unamuno takes his ship, his galleon, back from Asia, and they get to the California coast. And based on what we can figure out from the description of where he goes, he seems to be at about Morro Bay. And when they get to about Morro Bay, maybe south of there, San Simeon, those areas, he actually does a overland incursion into California. And they go for 2 days. Like there's 2 days that they go inland, quite some distance. There's some speculation it's Chorro Creek, which is near, coming up near like towards San Luis Obispo. And, they're describing the trees, and there's some pines, and, they're describing the people who are living there. It's like these northern Chumash kind of seems like villages, but it's hard to say. But they go inland, and they for the most part, they're not meeting anybody. They see all that there are people who live there. And, on the second day, they're coming out, and their rear guard. It's an amazing story. The journal says one of the Spaniards in the rear guard took off his chainmail. Okay. So you have to think of this as like, whoa, 16th century, right? Like, I mean, right. This is like Renaissance, right? Almost, right? Like that's really kind of the vibe. He took off his chainmail, and then they got attacked. His name was Felipe de Contreras, and he gets hit with a javelin through the breast, and he dies, and he becomes the very first Spaniard or person of European descent, killed in a conflict with the people who live in California. And for the people who are living here, right, this must be, just absolutely, crazy that you have these guys kind of coming into your lands. Some of them get killed in this conflict. And so this is the first armed conflict that we know of between the Spanish and the people who live in California. So, this is in 1587. They do get back to the ship. There was a couple other things that end up happening. It's a very fascinating story. But at that point, Unamuno decides that it's time to get out of there. And he tries to explore the rest of California going south, but it's so cloudy. He can't see anything. There's just so many fogs that he's not able to do much. And so he ends up kind of just hightailing it back to Mexico.
Now, wasn't Cabrillo, though, involved in some conflict? Isn't that part of how he wound up dying? I know that he got off his ship and evidently he hurt his leg, and then I guess it was infected, got gangrene. So weren't there some violent interactions on the Cabrillo trip?
You are so right, and I should have mentioned that. I'm thinking of the Cabrillo example, which probably happens on San Miguel Island. I was thinking it from the perspective that he shatters either his knee or his arm, and then becomes gangrenous, and then he dies. It's unclear from what I remember from that summary of the journal whether or not there is anyone is killed in those conflicts. You may have a better memory than I do, but I don't seem to remember if they report that. It doesn't mean it didn't happen, and it may have. I'm just not remembering correctly.
Right, you're
I just know with
right. Yeah, I didn't know whether anybody was killed. That's true.
Yeah, and it's a small distinction because you have a situation that is really, I mean, it's pretty intense. You have very different peoples coming into contact with one another. And so, it's not surprising that it becomes contentious, especially since the Spanish are coming into the homeland of the people living here going like, hey, who are you guys? And from a very early time period, the way that things worked was that the people who lived here were it's our house. If you come and you participate in reciprocal exchange with us, then it will be fine. But if you're just going to come in and you're just going to walk through our territory and you're not going to make any ovation to acknowledge that we're here, that's different. And I think in the case of Pedro Unamuno, it seems that that's kind of what happened. They just kind of went inland, and it was from the people who were living there's perspective, it was like, who is this guy and what are his intentions? So,
and he was clearly armed. If they're wearing chainmail, I mean, they clearly came in as an armed party. So I think in most societies, right, travelers, especially in small numbers, are usually welcome with hospitality, but armed groups are usually dealt with a lot more suspicion, right?
Absolutely. It's the same everywhere, right? I love that we had Jeremy Beer on here. You guys are having a similar discussion, which is there's something to be said, even though cultures are all individual and distinct, there's something to be said about common humanity. And any of us would feel the same way. If you had armed individuals marching through our streets, it would be tough to keep things calm, right? And that was what was happening. So yeah, they had chainmail and they had their arquebusiers, right? They were, the firearms, and and they used those firearms. And so you can imagine how this felt being, here in your home and having these guys come in. So it's an amazing story. And it's another one that doesn't get a lot of attention. But the same year in 1587, the British send another one of these privateers, because they're still at war with England, right? This is before the Spanish Armada, all that stuff. Same conflict. That Thomas Cavendish, who's sent by England, he is aware that these Manila galleons are sailing. And so in 1587, the same year that Unamuno's going into the interior of California near Morro Bay, one of these Manila galleons gets taken off of Cabo San Lucas. Cavendish is actually there. He's at Cabo San Lucas, what is today Cabo San Lucas, the Bay of San Bernabe. And he comes out and he takes the Santa Ana, which is one of the Manila galleons. And on board the Santa Ana, we think was Vizcaíno. This is 1587. And we think also Cermenho, which I'm going to get more into his story in just a minute. So these really important guys, and I'll talk about both of them, in California history, they were on board this ship when it happened. And so there's this fight. Cavendish, takes the ship, takes all of the cargo that they are interested in taking, leaves the crew up on land at where about Cabo San Lucas is today, burns the Santa Ana, the ship, and Cavendish takes off. The burning embers of the ship happen with a change of the wind, float and run aground on the coast of Baja California, and the crew from the galleon gets it, puts out the fire, and they construct a boat from that they end up taking down to I think it's Acapulco, where they go back down to. And so it's another one of these just unbelievable stories that, in this whole thing. So that all happens the same year. And so it's kind of a hot, contested space here in California, or the California is going down to Baja California at this time. And this is really early. We're still in 1587. Like I said, chainmail, that's in the documents.
And pointy helmets.
So, yep. And pointy helmets. Yeah, exactly. So now Spain at that point, right after 1587, they are, okay, we've got to figure this out. We can't afford to have our Manila galleons either, sinking because the men got scurvy, right? And that's probably what happened to San Juanillo in 1578, or getting taken by, an English corsair, right? And so there is another push in the 1590s to have another returning galleon explore the coast of California. And this happens in 1595. And it's under a Portuguese sailor named, commander named Cermenho. And Cermenho takes his ship, the San Agustin. It's actually a pretty small ship. Comes back from the Philippines and gets to California and ends up in Drake's Bay, at the exact same place where Sir Francis Drake was in 1579. And he stays there and does some land incursions, goes around all the areas there, the Miwok people who are living there. And he has numerous kind of encounters with them and describes them. And so we have really good details about, where about he was. And we actually can prove where he was based on the Vizcaíno expedition. But anyway, yeah, so he's there. And while he's there, San Agustin, which is his ship, we don't know why, but it runs aground in Drake's Bay. 1595. It's California's first shipwreck, we think. And we know it's still there. And there are artifacts from the ship that have at times been collected by the Park Service there off of Point Reyes. And, it's like all these ceramics, broken ceramics from, these Chinese wares that were traded through the Philippines. And so they end up constructing a boat. They actually have a launch, I think, and I think that they kind of add to it. I think it's 70 guys and their dogs, and it's an open top boat. And they take that thing out of Drake's Bay and they go all the way down the coast of California. And there's some amazing things that happen. They get to about Santa Barbara and they get near enough to the coast. They see a guy who's up on a bluff, and he comes running down the bluff and he's saying, Cristianos, Mexico. He's like, he knows the words, Christians, Mexicans. And so it's like, okay, so does he know this because Unamuno was there about 8 years before? Does he know this because he knows people who, had fraternized with Cabrillo? We don't know. But, he ends up kind of exploring all through Southern California and all the way down back to Acapulco. And those guys make it. But it's one of these unbelievable journeys again. So that's the San Agustin in 1595. So another story that it's like should get more play because more people interested because it's very interesting.
Right. And where did you come across these stories? I mean, or the story, for example, of Cermenho, or well, I guess if you've been to Point Reyes and you've seen the museum there, I suppose you probably know about it. But yeah, where are you coming across these stories?
Great question. I started with, I just forgot his first name, Mathis. He did a biography on Vizcaíno. And through that, I got, there's a early kind of maritime California historian named Henry R. Wagner. And he wrote a book called, it's like, was it? It might be like 16th century voyages to the Northwest coast, something like that. And then, yeah, it's great. It's hard to find. There's another book by, Paul A. Myers, and he put out a book that's kind of a summarization of all of this. North to California, like the Spanish discovery of, California, something like that. Paul A. Myers. So there's all these great, source, there's all this great source material. And there's great books on Cabrillo, reprints of his logs. And a lot of this stuff is online. And so I kind of put it together in a blog post that I wrote about Manila galleons, where I just kind of put things to post them. And it has kind of a summarization of all of this.
All right. Well, I'll put a link to that blog post so people can read it.
Awesome, man. That's great. That's awesome. Yeah. And that really takes us all the way through. I mean, we're all the way at the Vizcaíno expedition now, and that's 1602. And he's on this expedition for much the same reasons that these other guys were, which was to try to find a place in California where, there could be safe passage for Manila galleons. They could stop, they could get water, they could, repair their mast or repair their ship. And, Vizcaíno does the next really comprehensive, with him and his 3 ships, comprehensive expedition to California. And his expedition, they actually make the maps have survived. So we have the very maps that they made. And a lot of the place names that we have today go back in California that are really, really old. Like the Carmel River, right, was named after the Carmelite fathers that were on that expedition, including Father Ascension, who was the journalist, and lots of others. Santa Catalina Island, that was named then, San Diego, like a lot of these things. Monterey, right? All of those were named by Vizcaíno. None of the Cabrillo expedition names survive, but lots of the Vizcaíno. And then Point Mendocino predates Vizcaíno. That's one of the earliest place names in California. Vizcaíno goes all the way up the coast of California, does a lot of the same stuff. And there's great stories with that too. When he's at Catalina, this woman comes to the ship with she has two silk things made in China with her. And Vizcaíno and this expedition members there at Catalina go, "Where did you get these?" And there's an indication, there's some indication that there's a ship that sank near here. And so they actually say that the people who are there, I guess you have like Tongva people. It's hard to tell who they were talking with from the journals, if they're far enough north to be in the Chumash region or not. But anyways, they kind of say, "Hey, we'll take you up to the ship where the ship went aground." But they're way down in Southern California. And so it's like, did they expect to go all the way up to Drake's Bay? But anyways, that's another one of those stories. And Vizcaíno goes all the way up to Monterey. And anybody's been to Monterey, you can go see part of the tree. There was a big tree in Monterey that hung over the, kind of inlet there, and where they had mass and Vizcaíno, the whole expedition. And, that part of that tree is still up there. And you can see it in Mission San Carlos Borromeo. But yeah, so Vizcaíno goes to that bay and he says, "This is it. This is the place where the Manila galleons have to come." Right? This is where they have to come. He actually sends one ship back to Mexico at that point with all the sick aboard. And some of the other 2 ships go further north. And in the Vizcaíno expedition was also Bolaños, who was the pilot with the San Agustin in 1595. And so when he goes up north, he actually points out Drake's Bay and says, "That's where our ship sank." They're unable to go there because of the winds, but that's how we know that that's where the San Agustin and Sacramento was. So there's the whole Vizcaíno expedition is this fascinating thing. And that really puts kind of a capstone on Spanish interest in California at this time period. We know that Manila galleons would stopped here between the end of the Vizcaíno expedition in 1603 and the Portola expedition in 1769. But they're, as far as official exploration of what is now Alta California, that it really stopped with the end of Vizcaíno. And he really pumped up Monterey. He was like, "This is the place to go." But the Manila galleon captain started to say to the viceroy, by that point, we just want to hightail it back to Acapulco. We don't want to stop. And so it's not worth trying to create a colony up there. And so they don't. And that's kind of the end of it. Despite the efforts of Father Ascension, who was the journalist with the Vizcaíno expedition, he was trying to make that happen. He was really pushing for the viceroy to do that. And it's Ascension who passed down apparently that story of Morena from the Drake expedition. So there's a lot here, Damien. It's so amazing, It's just a bunch of amazing stories that we I don't think we really think about in California history.
No, even people who study it, like I do, that's a lot of stuff that I don't know about. And it's always made me wonder why the names that Cabrillo applied to the places he visited didn't stick,
I agree. Yep. It's a great point. And, there are maps from like the 1550s and 60s that have the Cabrillo names. And they're not bad,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like the islands are about right, and they have different names, but they probably, I've thought about this a lot. And because one of the things about trying to write about much later the Portola expedition is the Portola expedition ends up having a lot of troubles. One of them is that Vizcaíno talked up Monterey so much that when they actually see Monterey, they're like, this is it? And they're questioning it so much they don't even think that they're in Monterey. They think this must be wrong. They keep going north, and then they reach San Francisco, and whoa, we didn't know about this. But I think the Spanish bureaucracy did not do a great job of archiving a lot of this material. I don't know why. Maybe they did. Maybe that some of these guys doing these expeditions, they were really ambitious, and they wanted to kind of erase that which came before, and they, wanted to pump up, hey, we're here for the first time. I'm not sure, but it is surprising to me because, for instance, like the Vizcaíno maps are good enough that if the Portola expedition had been in possession of them, they would have known they were in Monterey. And we have them today. And it's strange that they didn't have them in 1769. And with Cabrillo, we have this summary that Urdaneta, right, wrote in the 1560s. And he's clearly taking from multiple sources of information from that Cabrillo expedition. And all of those are lost. We have not found any of those, the original source material. And we even think that there was maps and don't have it. So, it's hard to say. In part, I think what happened was the Spanish mindset was changing in the 1500s. It started off with, hey, maybe we can find another one of these amazing civilizations, rich in a bunch of things. And then it kind of slowly changed into, we need to establish trade routes. We need to kind of organize all of this. And so you have kind of two different mindsets. And Cabrillo kind of happened in the former mindset. It was trying to find the seven cities, trying to find some major, kind of geographical connection between North America and Asia. Once that died down, right, then you kind of had a different approach that was probably more systemized and more formalized. And that's why the names later survive and those earlier ones don't. It's all speculation. I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure there's probably somebody who has a good theory about it, but it makes sense what you say, that the mindset definitely changes from let's discover these mythical areas and new civilizations to let's establish a location where we can keep our commerce safe from pirates and keep the trade routes open and perhaps have a nice safe port. I think by that point, people probably are keeping better records, and they're a little bit more systematic about how they do things, one would think.
I agree. And that was a much better summarization. I totally agree. That's exactly right. So yeah, it goes to show you that the Spanish had a full story arc with California during this early era. And, there's scholarship now moving in this direction of tying, right? Our friend, Dr. Marie Duggan, she's really been looking into the economics of all, California and Asia. And you go, yeah, it makes sense, right? That from the earliest parts of our, Spanish exploration, the earliest, kind of incursions into the California story were because of kind of this idea of trade with Asia. And, that carries on all the way through today, right? So it's very interesting, and it really does kind of help put California in a different context than just, the missions. It's like, oh yeah, this played a part in kind of the formation of world trade, and California was just a little point on the road in that story, but it now we have these wonderful stories that we can talk about.
Yeah, and it ties in with going back to the interview I did with Jason Sexton about Kevin Starr, the great historian of California. He even went so far as to call California an Asian place, right? That this connection to Asia, it's there from the beginning of European presence, right? And, perhaps even from the beginning of human presence, because if it's true that humans crossed a land bridge from Asia to come into the west coast of North America, then it's always been a natural connection. Though I don't know enough about that stuff to be able to make a good commentary on it.
That's such a good point, and there's some other scholars, right, doing this, and wonderful scholars, and you're so right, and the story is so big, you can't have anybody who knows it all, which is why it's great that we can have these conversations, so that people who kind of have their things that they're focusing on have a forum to exchange those ideas. It's like I've learned so much from your guests and from your conversations and from you.
Totally.
Geez, Damien, you know so much cool stuff. And it's like, oh man, that makes me think about things in another new way. And it's, in order for good history to be, created and put out there into the world, you have to have good historians constantly talking, and that's what this is. So I'm sure listeners will have many things to add that I'm like, oh man, I didn't know that, or corrections or new things to consider. I mean, just as you have in this conversation.
Definitely. Great. I'm sure I'll get some really interesting emails, with tidbits about the things we're talking about. So let me not take more of your time up, but I think that what we've talked about is it's a great illustration of the fact that there's so much out there still to learn about, and how California, whatever it was called then and whatever it is now, was so plugged in to these trade networks, was so plugged into world history, and that there are these stories out there that when you think that you know it all, or you think that, there's just a little bit here and there prior to the gold rush, let's say, or even prior to the arrival of the missions, et cetera, you realize that no, there's a whole lot going on, and the continuity of the native people as well. I mean, I'm so excited about the type of things that we're still going to be able to dig up and talk about and poke around and learn about. So yeah, it's always great to talk to you and hear about the things you're working on, because there's always something cool that you're digging up. And so, thanks a lot. Man. Thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely, man. And I thank you, Damien, for having me on here. And just for my own, put a capstone on this, the thing that I love about this is that it's like, when I hear about things, when I learn about this stuff, I get to go to the beach and look out over the ocean. And now I start to think, oh man, think of the stories that took place here, right? And so, all of your podcasts are kind of a window into when I go to different places in California. It's like, oh wow, there's this story now that I can imagine, and it's now imbued with a lot more, kind of structure, because you and your guests are able to do that. So it helps me, just because I love this stuff, it gives me so much perspective. So thank you for continuing to do this. It's a lot of fun.
That is awesome. Well, if you're up for it, we'll keep it going.
Let's keep it going.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the California Frontier Show. If you'd like to support the show, the best thing to do is to let other people know about it. If you'd like to support it monetarily, there are a couple ways of doing that. One is by scrolling down in your podcast app to where it says support the show. There you can become a subscriber for as little as $3 a month. And if you want to give a one-time donation, just below you'll see where it says give a one-time donation. Finally, the show is supported by California History Teachers, which is a full year of lessons for 4th grade California history and social studies. You can find out more at www.californiahistoryteachers.com. And if you input the coupon code PODCAST, you'll receive 25% off your monthly or annual subscription. So check it out.